Hello again. Welcome to lesson 25 on Gregor Mendel, the grandpapa of genetics. Basically what this is really is doing those Punnet squares. So if you were having a hard time on the last part of the last lesson, when you started having to cross parents and make those squares, don't worry, because this lesson is really going to clarify it and break it down almost a little too simple, because it's going to be very kind of easy and clear and repetitive after this. You're going to get a lot of practice on this. So you should be on this page of your handout. It would look like that, right? That's what you would have here. So the first thing you got to know is that Gregor Mendel is, he was the guy who basically discovered genetics. He was cross-pollinating pea plants, hence I like peas. He was taking pea plants and looking at different parts of the peas and taking one pea and pollinating with another and then looking at what the offspring was and going, there's all different kinds of patterns for what this offspring can look like. And eventually he started doing research and keeping logs. If you go to a museum where he studied, it's just books and books and books and books and books. His whole life he spent crossing basically just peas. Making charts and writing everything down until he basically came up with the backbone of what we would consider modern genetics, which is pretty amazing because he was doing it over 100 years ago. Pretty awesome. So now what you've got down here is some key terms, and you can see that there's some added things here. Now, what I want to do is you don't need to write this down, but you can. But I'm going to take these terms and kind of simplify them and add a couple more, because if you know what these terms mean, you're good for the rest of the genetic stuff of the unit. You're going to be fine. So I'm going to take some time and explain these, right? So some of them I'll rewrite. A trait is a characteristic an organism can pass on to its offspring. So a trait equals characteristic to offspring. For example, and this is the examples are what's going to really help you. Tall or short, for example. So this would be right. That would be tall, short, because this dominant overrides that. So just tall or short would be a trait. A gene is a part of DNA that codes for a certain trait. So this is kind of cool. If you had a gene, you got to think of it like this. If you had your DNA that was kind of crossing like that, and you had all this DNA that was fancy, well, just a little part of that DNA, if this was DNA, that little section here, that would be considered a gene, and it would control a trait. For example, hair color, eye color, height, and things like that. So just in your nucleus of your cells, you have chromosomes. This is a piece of DNA. That's what chromosomes are made up of. And in one of those little pieces, out of those 23 pairs, that could be one little section that would be called a gene, and it would control for something. Next up, an allele is a different form of a gene. For example, a purple or white flower. So allele something like that. Now dominant is the one that will take over. So if you had Dominant will take over. Example, use capital letters. Another thing is if, say, we're talking about hair color and we're talking about, well, say we're talking about height of a plant, tall versus short. Well, the dominant one would be big T. And then obviously the next thing here, recessive, equals hidden by any dominant. So I'd say a little t. Now, why do we use t? Because whatever the trait is, if we're talking height, tall versus short, well, t, tall is dominant, so we'll use the letter t. That'll make more sense right away as we get into more things here right away. So, for example, a dominant trait will take over. So if you have this or this, well, the tall is dominant, so it'll take over the short. It'll show up as a tall plant. And this is kind of fun. Phenotype versus genotype. Phenotype is what it looks like. Genotype is what the nerdy definition is. For example, if I had a plant like this, say we're going to talk about the phenotype versus the genotype for a plant that is, we're going to talk about a plant that's like this, all right? So the phenotype, what would it look like? It would be tall. That's all you have to say. It's a tall plant. Phenotype equals what it looks like. And how would you say what the genotype is? You would say it is hybrid, or you could say it is heterozygous because it's different, tall. All of those words would make sense. Hybrid tall or heterozygous tall. It's the genetic makeup. I kind of call it the nerdy definition. So now you've got phenotypes. So if somebody says, okay, you've made a cross of these plants, tell me the phenotype. They just want you to tell you what it's going to look like. Don't worry, we'll be practicing this right away. And then they say, tell me the genotype. They want you to tell you the actual genetic makeup of it. Don't worry, we're going to practice this in the sheets right away. And there's a couple more things right here, right? Homozygous equals same. Now you can have, let's break this down. You can have homodominant, or you could have homorecessive. Homodominant would be dominant, dominant. They're the same. Homorecessive would mean recessive, little letter, but they're the same, which leads us to heterozygous. Don't worry, there's a lot of terms being thrown at you right now, but we'll do some practice stuff together and it's going to start to make sense right away. Don't you panic. Heterozygous means different. For example, the only option would be one big and one little, right? Tall plant, short plant, tall plant, because the dominant takes over. It's heterozygous. Now, there's two more words you need to know. It's not on here, but I would say the other two words you need to know is purebred and hybrid. And purebred means the same, so that's the same. It's just another word for homozygous. And hybrid is just another word for heterozygous. Equals different. So purebred, you could be purebred tall, or you could be purebred short. Hybrid obviously means one is different than the other, so that would always be this. It would show up as tall. Okay, don't worry. Let's just talk about what's going on in these slides now. So some of the things that Gregor Mendel looked at when he was looking at peas, he would make charts for the flower color, purple or white. He would say the flower position. Is the flower on the middle of the stem or at the top, axial or terminal? He would look at the color of the seeds. He would say, are the seeds yellow or green? He would look at the shape. Are the seeds round or are they wrinkled? He would look at the shape of the pea pod. Are they inflated and puffy or are they constricted and tight around the peas? He would look at the color of the pod. Was it a green pod or a yellow pod? And he would also look at the length. He would say, is it tall or is it dwarf or short? So those are the things that he would study. And for each of those traits, he would make charts and charts and charts and charts and keep booklets of generation after generation of peas. So these are some of the things that Gregor Mendel looked at when he'd make a chart. So he would make charts for this trait. And then he would go and say, okay, what about the positions? And he'd make charts for these, etc. So these are some of the things that he looked at. So how does this apply to us? Well, let's see. Let's say, for example, we took a tall plant and we crossed it with a short plant. Big T, purebred. So it's going to be a purebred tall plant, and we crossed it with a purebred short plant. So how do we set up that Punnet square? Well, we would simply, what we would do is we'd make a square. We put one parent here and one parent here. So one parent is purebred tall, the other one is purebred short. Always put the big letter in front. Okay, that's your offspring, and it says right here, all plants would be big T, little t. Now, let's use some of those terms that we had just used. So what would we say? What are different words we could say this parent was? We could say it was, obviously it's going to be a tall parent, and this is going to be a short parent. This is purebred tall. What's another word for purebred? You could also say homozygous because it's the same. So you could also use the word homozygous tall. Now this plant, they're the same too, so they're going to be homozygous, but they're not homozygous dominant or tall. This is right, this is homo dominant, because the big T is always dominant over little t's. So for this one, you could say it was homo recessive. You could say it was homo short. Another word would be purebred recessive or short. But let's look at the offspring. Every one of these offspring has a big T in it. So it's going to be a tall plant, but it's not tall, it's tall short. So we have to say that 100% of these plants are hybrid, would be one way to look at it. Another word for that would be heterozygous, because hetero means different. 100% heterozygous offspring, but they're all going to be tall. So you could say hetero-tall or hybrid tall, right? Another thing is to say, what would these plants, what would their, let's go here, what would their phenotype be? Remember, phenotype means look like. So we'll say, what's their phenotype and what's their genotype? So if you have all of your plants are this, I would say the phenotype is going to be 100%. What are they going to look like? Tall. I don't have to say whether they're hybrid, tall, or dominant tall. No, I just say what they look like. All those plants are going to look tall. And what's the genotype? That's where I have to get nerdy. I have to say 100% heterozygous, G-O-U-S, or I could say hybrid, same difference, right? Same words, tall. So phenotype means what does it look like? And genotype is genetics, the nerdy one, right? So if I was expressing what the phenotype was of these offspring, they're all tall. That's all I have to say. If I want to say the genotype, I'd have to say they're hybrid or heterozygous because they're different. Tall. Don't worry. This is the first real example of this you've gotten, and we're going to do some more right away. So now let's take a look at the next thing. We're going to take, we can skip down through there. Oh, there you go. That's great. Look at the slides even say, right? The alleles could be big T or little t. The genotypes, these are all your options. These would be homozygous, homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, heterozygous, or another word for heterozygous, get used to it, is hybrid. And then the phenotypes you could have is tall, tall, or short. Tall, tall, or short. Genotypes are the genetic makeup. Phenotypes are what it looks like in the real world. This sheet is really good, actually. Let's take a look here. So we're going to take... I don't like that one. Let's skip that for now. Let's go on to the package here. All right, so we're going to go back to your booklet here. We're going to scroll through. And now let's do a couple practice ones. So, here we go. This sheet is great, by the way. If you take a look, so get to here. And we're going to do this one together. And then your assignment is going to be to do a couple of these practice ones right here with the mice. And I'm going to give you some help on them as well. So you're not going to have too much work today because we're going to kind of do it together. So let's do this sheet together right here. All right, so let's take a look. So this is a great practice one. In pea plants, spherical seeds, S, are dominant to dented. So since spherical are dominant, we use the letter S. So big S is going to mean spherical seeds, and little s is going to mean dented. What does that even mean? Well, spherical seed would be a seed that's round, and a dented seed would be a seed that kind of looks like that, right? So this would be big S, and this would be little s. Okay, cool. So we're going to cross a spherical with a spherical. But notice, what's cool? What's cool is these aren't dominant spherical, they're hybrid. Or another word for hybrid, remember, get comfortable with that, is heterozygous. So we have big S, little s plant being crossed with a big S, little s plant. That's kind of wild. So we're going to have all kinds of weird combinations coming out of this. The figure above represents a cross of a generation 1 hybrid plant because it's big and little, so it's hybrid. So to solve the problem, you're going to need to cross these two. You're going to have to set up a Punnet square. Set up a Punnet square. So the first thing you do is you make your square. Write the alleles for parent 1 on the left side of the Punnet square. Big S, little s. All right, write the alleles for parent 2 above the other square. Big S, little s. And now you need to fill them in. How does that work? Let's take a look. Okay. So we take big S, little s, big S, little s. So big S and big S combine here to make big S, big S, big S. Oh, that's even better. Big S, make big S, big S. Big S with little s makes a big S and a little s. Big S and a little s makes a big S and a little s. And little s and little s make double little s. So what would that mean? When we look at the results, we can look at the different genotypes. 25%, because 1 out of 4 squares, is going to be homozygous dominant. Another word for that would be purebred dominant. 50% of the genotypes are going to be hybrid or heterozygous dominant. And then you've got this little quarter down here that's a little s and a little s, so 25% would be homozygous recessive or purebred recessive. So now that's the genotypes, right? That's the genetic makeup. But the phenotypes is just what it looks like. Well, that's a little bit easier because all you have to say when you look at your chart is this is going to be spherical, 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 wrinkled. So you could just say 75% are spherical, 25% are dented. Not bad. You should be getting a little bit more comfortable, but now we're going to do a couple without the answers here, and I'm going to help you out. So let's do this one right here. On the next page, you have yellow is dominant, so we're going to use the letter Y, and green is recessive, so we're going to use big Y for yellow, little y for green, because you always use the letter for the dominant. Yellow is dominant, so we're going to use big Y for yellow, little y for green. So let's take here, parent 1, we're going to cross these two parents. Big Y, cross with little y, little y. Every single one is going to drop down and become big Y, little y. So you have to say the genotypes, 100% of those offspring are going to be big and little. So they're all 100% are going to be hetero. The phenotype, are they all going to be yellow? Yep, because they all have a big Y, so 100% yellow. Okay, that's just another example that you can look through. But now we've got some questions that are blank on their own. Let's try these as a group together. So, the Punnet square on the right shows a cross between a mouse with a dominant gray coat and a mouse with a recessive gray coat. Dominant, gray is the color, so we use G, and little g, and you get up, this is your offspring, right? What are the color out of all the offspring? Well, if there's a big G, that means 100% are going to be gray. Fill across a Punnet square to show two hybrid mice. What does hybrid mean? Hybrid means one big letter and one little letter. So both parents, it's a cross two parents that are hybrid. So I'm going to put one big G here, and I'm going to put one little g here, and I'm going to put a big G here, and a little g here. Now we're going to try it on our own. Big G, big G. Big G, little g. Big G, little g. And little g, little g. Okay, so based on your Punnet square, how many out of every 4 baby mice is likely to have a pure dominant trait? Just that one, right? 1 out of every 4, likely. That doesn't mean you can't have more if you have different kids. It's just randomly, it's doing a rough estimate of what, if you had lots of offspring, what percentage would be what. So about 1 out of every 4 would be purebred dominant. How many out of every 4 baby mice are likely to have a pure recessive trait? That one right there. So 1 out of 4 possibilities. So I'd say, how many out of every 4 baby mice are likely to be hybrid? Hybrid means a big letter and a little letter. Or you could also say heterozygous, same word. 2. How many out of every 4 baby mice are likely to be gray? Now this is a little different because gray means anything with a big G. So now we've got a big G, so that's going to be gray. We got a big G and a little g. Guess what? That's still going to show up as gray because that big G overrides the little g. And then we've got one here, big G, little g. So out of every 4 baby mice, 3 are likely to be gray. And that means that out of every 4 mice, 1 is likely to be white. Now, this is the work that you're going to have to do. But I'm going to actually help you do it right now because, I don't know, I think it's good to kind of explain this. You're going to have a lot of time to practice right away. So I'm going to do this sheet with you right now. So we are actually looking at this page right here. All right. So let's do this together. I'm going to talk you through it to help you out a little bit here. Oh, don't want to knock my ruler over. There we go. So let's just do the cross first before we even read this, okay? Big B, big B. So we're going to have a big B parent and a big B, or offspring. Big B, little b. Big B, little b. They cross. And then little b carries down, little b carries over. Okay, so now we've got this cross. So this parent was obviously hybrid, and this parent was hybrid. They had one big and one little, one big and one little, and then this is the offspring possibilities. So how many are going to be homozygous black fur? Just that one. So that's 25%. What percentage are going to be heterozygous black fur or big B, little b? That one and that one, 50%. And what percent are going to be homozygous brown fur or little b, 25%. Okay, now the phenotypes, how many are going to have black fur? Well, that's going to be black. That's going to be black because that big B takes over. And that one, big B, takes over. So 75% black, 25% brown. Notice that genotype is the actual genetic makeup, whereas phenotype is just what it looks like. Phenotypes are normally a little more simple, right? That's just what it looks like. Okay, now do the same when one parent is homozygous black. Now, this is where this is going. So you got to pay attention. It's going to tell you the names of the parents or what they look like, and you're going to have to determine what the letters for that parent are. That's where we're going in the future. So let's take a look. Homozygous black. Homo means same. Black is dominant. So that means this parent is going to be big B, big B. And the other is homozygous brown. That means that parent is going to be little b, little b. So we have to cross those two parents here. So I would put parent 1 here, big B, big B. And I would cross it with the other parent, which was homo brown, which is little b, little b. We fill out this chart, big B, little b. Big B, little b. You're going to notice something here. Every single one of them is going to look the same. Okay. How many are going to have homozygous black for big B and big B of the offspring? 0. How many are going to have heterozygous black for a big and a little? Every one, 100%. How many are going to have homozygous brown fur, little b, 0. How many are going to have black fur in the phenotypes, because this is what it looks like? Pheno means looks. In the phenotypes, you're going to have 100% black fur, 0% brown fur. Now, let's do the last question. Repeat this process again when one parent is heterozygous black and the other is homozygous brown. Okay, so heterozygous black means one big B and one little b. Hetero means different, right? And the other is homozygous brown. Now, brown is recessive. It's weak, but it's homozygous, so it's little b, little b. So we take this parent, big B, little b, and we take this parent, little b, and we cross them. Big B, little b, ooh, little b, big B, little b, ooh, little b. So how many are going to be homozygous black, big B? I can't find any there. How many are going to be heterozygous black? 50%. This is the genotypes, right? How many are going to be homozygous brown? Those two, so that's 50%. How many are going to have black fur? These two. And how many are going to have brown fur? Those two. So your job is to fill out these charts with me, submit those pictures for lesson 25, and then we're going to move on to a little reading package. You're going to do some reading answers, and then you're going to get a lot of these charts in the assignment after, where you're just going to practice doing Punnet squares till the cows come home, or till the mice or the peas come home, or maybe even some SpongeBob questions. What's he talking about? We'll see later. Take care.